Hey, what's up, guys? I'm going to be starting a new series on Delphi. What do we really know what's going on in Delphi, Indiana? Richard Allen's attorneys were taken from him by the judge, and then they were given back to him by the Supreme Court. And there was some new charges that were filed on him. Let's get into that video right now.
Richard Allen, the man accused of murdering two teenage girls in Delphi, Indiana, is back in court facing new charges as his lawyers try to get the case against him thrown out. We have the fireworks from court. Thanks for joining me for Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Richard Allen's trial for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German is now scheduled to begin on May 13th. That's very soon. He wants a speedy trial now that his original lawyers, Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin, are back on the case. Judge Francis Gall had removed them from the case after a friend and former employee of Baldwin's leaked crime scene photos to a podcaster, unbeknownst to Baldwin. The attorney's removal was a debacle, and the Indiana Supreme Court reinstated them because Allen wanted them as his lawyers. Now the prosecutor wants Rosie and Baldwin held in contempt for the leak of those photos. But this week, Allen's defense team argued the charges against him should be thrown out because of some errors in the investigation, including their claim that interviews from the first 70 days of the investigation are missing and were erased. Abby and
Did you hear that, guys? The first 70 days of interviews have been missing and or erased. I'm sorry, if that happens, that's a huge travesty of justice or collusion or possibly negligence. This man deserves a new trial, possibly maybe even an acquittal if they're trying to screw him over that bad.
Libby, you'll recall, were found murdered on Valentine's Day in 2017. It's an awful, awful case. The girls had been dropped off at the Monon High Trail the day before, but didn't meet up with their parents later that day and were reported missing. The FBI released that clip of the suspect in 2019. Richard Allen was arrested and charged more than 3 years later in 2022 with Abby and Libby's murders. With me to discuss the very latest in the Delphi murders case is Joe Giacalone. He is a retired cold case sergeant, also the host of True Crime with the Sarge on YouTube, and Bob Mata. He's a defense attorney and the host of the Defense Diaries podcast. Bob, I'll start with you. Tell us what happened in court this week.
So on Monday, we had two hearings took place, and they were both pretty highly anticipated by the state for contempt against Allen's two attorneys, Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie. It's kind of a continuation of, if people aren't familiar with the case, a few months back, the judge in that case, Judge Gull, had removed both of Rick Allen's attorneys, and she had felt that they had been what she termed grossly negligent in their representation of him. Those guys then went up to the Supreme Court of Indiana. They had it out up there. Supreme Court said, look, we're reinstating him because we're concerned about Richard Allen's Sixth Amendment rights. So those guys came back on the case. So after that was done, the prosecutor said, well, you know what? I still want them to be found in contempt of court. So he had this hearing set up. So that was the better part of the day, actually. So packed courtroom, tons of people in line waiting to get in there in the early mornings in the bitter cold in Indiana. And so that hearing took, like I said, the better part of the day. And then the later portion of the day was filled with the defense's motion to dismiss the entire case based on evidence that was either lost or destroyed that the defense was claiming could contain exculpatory evidence. So for me personally, I was much more interested in the second hearing because it was really more in tune with the trial.
How could Richard Allen look like that? He looks sickly, emaciated, and pale. Look at Brian Koberger. He is healthy. He looks well fed. But poor Richard Allen looks like he's on death's doorstep.
Trial itself, whereas the first one was really just the prosecutor wanting to punish the defense attorneys. At this point, 56 days out from trial, which is set for May 13th, everybody needs to be focusing on that trial. It's a huge trial.
Let's talk about the defense's claim that exculpatory evidence has been destroyed. They're claiming that 70 days worth of interviews, in this case, basically the first 70 days or so of interviews with witnesses, other people in this case, have been destroyed.
You heard her say it. 70 days worth of evidence, witness statements, destroyed. What is going on in Delphi, Indiana? Is it prosecutorial misconduct? Destroying evidence? Destroying witness statements? Destroying interview documents?
What was the prosecution's response to that? I just can't even imagine. You go into a case and you're trying to comb through the discovery, and boom, all of this stuff is gone from the most important stages, or what could be arguably the most important part of the investigation, the very early stages.
Yeah, there really was no viable excuse in terms of what the answer to that was, because and of course the prosecutor didn't have any control over what they're claiming happened, which was that the DVR that they used in the police station, which was used to record multiple rooms, and I'm talking about interrogation or interview rooms, that somebody had changed a setting on it and that it was running continuously 24/7 from, and it started, and there's two different periods. So there's from February 14th, and as you said aptly, Anjanette, we're talking about the day after, actually the day that the girls are discovered. So when they start interviewing people immediately, and that in those critical first days of an investigation, all of that was lost because what they're claiming is that the video just continued to run and run and run, went through 6 terabytes, which I don't know if that's actually possible. I've had people that work security that said that 1 terabyte can typically do 24/7 for 30 days. And they were saying that this was a 6 terabyte memory, and that it ran all the way through it and then overrode everything that had been taped or videotaped in those first days. So, I mean, there wasn't really like an excuse that would satisfy anybody. At the end of the day, the judge is going to deny that motion. She would never dismiss this case for that.
Sure.
There were summary reports that were prepared by law enforcement that were summarizing what was said in those particular interviews. I believe that she's going to find those to be sufficient as a substitute. So I think, as shocking as it is, the conscience, and I mean, evidence does get lost. Like this isn't a situation where it doesn't happen, where videos don't get overridden. It's happened to me many times. There's typically a workaround, and it typically is like a narrative summary report. As a defense attorney, I don't love that. We all hear things differently. Joe may have a report, and he may think that something that I think is incredibly important when he's drafting his report is I think it's critical. You know what I mean? So the best evidence is always going to be the actual video.
I agree with you 100%. There's no way Judge Gull is dismissing
No
this
way.
case. But Joe, I want to bring you in on this. You have overseen cold case investigations. You're a cop for decades. This is not good. I mean, this is a high profile case. There may be narrative reports outlining what was said in these interviews, but still, there's nothing like capturing on video what somebody said, what a potential witness said in an interview. And we're talking about 70 days of interviews. I mean, it just seems
70 days of interviews, 70 days of recordings, 70 days of evidence gone. This guy needs to be acquitted because clearly there's something rotten going on in Delphi.
seems like a mistake. Mistakes can happen in investigations, but this just seems mind-boggling to me. I mean, I know it was a small town, small police department. They brought Indiana State Police in to help. Eventually the FBI gets involved, but your thoughts on 70 days of interviews being lost?
Yeah, so this is a problem in regards to what, do they have redundant systems, right? And if not, if police departments are watching this all over the country, they need to install a redundant system that makes sure that this never happens. Because listen, when you're dealing with an investigation, and from the supervisor point of view, yeah, not only even in the cold case squad, but I was also a squad supervisor too, and you're signing off on cases, and you're doing all these things. And I can tell you one thing that I preach, that the department preached all the time, is documentation, documentation, and documentation, right? If it's not documented, it's never done. So here's the problem. Not every time did the detective write a report in a timely manner. And as you know, as well as I do, the longer it goes, the worse that detective's memory gets. And that's why they can go back to a video and look at it again and then, dot their I's and cross their T's as like a kind of like a fail safe, like, oh, I have the video, I can always watch it. Well, that's not going to be possible now in this case. So they can't go back. So if reports weren't done on time, and that's a supervisor's job to make sure that it gets done on time, that's going to be some big issues. Specifically now, they're going to be not caught, but they're going to be on the stand, and they're going to have to now explain why something wasn't documented. Why didn't you write the report? Or when did you write the report? So, for instance, the time you write the report should be on it, right? So everything's electronic now. So if I did the interview on Monday and I don't write the report till Friday, that's documented on the actual form. This becomes an issue for police departments. That's why we strongly recommend through training. As soon as you're done, you want to take a quick break. I get it, but write it down before your memory fades. You got your notes, you got your maybe a tape recorder, whatever it may be, but please document it. I think we're going to find out that some of this stuff wasn't documented on time in regards to this case.
And that is critical. The documentation is critical because that's how you run an investigation. I mean, you see the police officers, I mean, at scenes and stuff like that. I mean, these days they have body cameras, some departments, not all. I mean, I remember even covering a case back in 2005 in Wisconsin, a really big case. And I remember being really impressed back then when the case went to trial. And one of the detectives was walking through the scene with a video camera. I mean, just like a camcorder. And I was like, wow, that's really cool that he did that. So documentation and videotape doesn't lie. So I think that's always very critical. Let's talk now about these new murder charges. Judge Gall approved some new murder charges. She denied the prosecution's request to add some other charges. Richard Allen is now charged, Bob, with murder while committing or attempting to commit the offense of kidnapping. So Judge Gall approved the Richard Allen facing those new charges, but she did not allow the prosecution to charge him with kidnapping separately. So how big of a deal is that?
It's not a big deal at all. And what actually what occurred is they ended up dismissing the state because it would have been a redundancy with respect to the kidnapping charges, because now the new amended charges include kidnapping within them. So they didn't need counts 5 and 6. So that's why they dismissed those. The judge didn't force that to happen. The state said we're going to withdraw them because they didn't need it.
So they dismissed 2 charges on him and then put 2 new charges in their place. Very, very interesting.
In terms of what we're looking at, as far as the charges goes, it didn't move the needle at all. It's the exact same thing. So ultimately, they still have to prove the same thing for both. Now, originally in Indiana, they don't call it the felony murder rule, but if you're familiar with felony murder, that essentially means that they only need to prove that the kidnapping occurred and that as a result of that kidnap, that the girls were killed in order to get the conviction on the murder. So, which still remains the case. You know, when McClellan came out and said that I want to amend the charges to add just the straight murder, I think it was done in a way to boost the public's confidence in saying that, look, we have a strong case against Richard Allen. Remember, perception is everything in cases going into a trial. And, you know, as a defense attorney, when we see felony murder as the primary counts, we know that they don't have the evidence at that time on the underlying charge, because otherwise they would have brought it on the murder. So we knew when they came with the felony, our version of what they call felony murder, that they didn't have a strong case of the murder, but they had a strong case that they believed in terms of him being the one who corralled the girls and got them down to where they ultimately met their demise.
Yeah, it's just a horrible, horrible case. I mean, Abby
Brutal.
and Libby, those poor little girls. I mean, it's just horrific. Yeah, there
Brutal.
are 3 pieces of evidence that the defense calls critical in this case, Joe. One being the bullet found at the crime scene that they say was cycled through a gun that Richard Allen owned. They said they were able to do a comparison. They were able to, the striations and everything. They were able to tell that that bullet found at the scene was cycled.
Look at him. He's horrible, guys. He looks like he's on death's door. What are they doing to him in the jail he's at? I've heard some wild stuff, some wild speculation that they're using shock therapy on him, that he's not eating because people's taking his food from him.
Gun that Richard Allen owned that was found in his home. So you've got that. You've got cell phone evidence and the data surrounding that. And then his alleged confession that the defense basically says is not, they think it's bunk because he was in solitary confinement at a prison, a maximum security prison, which is a whole nother issue. I mean, this guy was not convicted of anything and he's being held in a maximum security prison, not a county jail. It just boggles my mind. So there are some critical pieces of evidence here that the defense feels they really have to attack in this case. So do you look at this as a strong case for the state? Do you think this is a challenging case for the defense, Joe?
Well, here's the problem with this, what they're referring to now as the magic bullet, right? The question comes down to is, when was this found? There have been reports in the news that says that this bullet was found after the crime scene had been completed, broken down, and then had to come back, whether it is a few days later or what have you. That becomes a huge problem, right? So in crime scene investigation, we teach the detectives, you get one chance to do it right. Going back to a crime scene is never ideal because you open yourself up to, you went back and planted it, or somebody else went back from the time you closed it off to the time you went back. And this becomes an issue, right? So there are reports that this bullet was actually even buried in the dirt. And then there's also reports saying that the bullet was found in between where the 2 girls were lying. So there's some misinformation out there in regards to this quote unquote magic bullet. So I need to know about that. And here's the other thing about this. And the defense is going to be looking at the chain of custody. Who found it? When did they find it? Who did they give it to? Who got it at the lab? Right? Everybody who's in that chain is going to be, they're going to have a parade of people coming into that courtroom. We're going to talk about that bullet because it becomes a major piece of this investigation.
Bob, your thoughts?
I'm with Joe on that, and he's exactly right. Aside from what I construe to be issues with, what are going to be the tool marking issues that are going to come up, because remember, this was an unspent casing, meaning that it didn't cycle through the barrel. It was ejected from the gun. That alone, I've never seen a case anywhere in the country where that was the piece of evidence that got somebody convicted. It's just different than when it cycles through. You're not going to get the striations and the markings like you will if the bullet's, passing through the barrel of the gun. And we're just talking about it popping out probably when the gun was racked. So I think that's a big issue for them. And then you compound it with what exactly Joe was saying, with the fact that we don't know when this thing was found, and I'm in the same position with with respect to where Joe is at. I'm hearing the same things. Now, I don't know. We'll have to wait till trial to see if any of these things that we're hearing are accurate, because I've heard everything from they found it the day of, they found it 3 days later, that somebody found it with a metal detector that wasn't even law enforcement. I've heard just a variety of things. I've been doing this long enough to know that we just have to wait until trial to find out what's what. But if it is the case that they actually shut the scene down, they considered it to be fully processed, and then days later they came back and that's when they recover it, Joe's exactly right. That is going to be a huge issue at trial. And when you compound it with the fact that I don't know that that's not junk science with respect to being able to have somebody give their subjective opinion on tool markings of a ejected unspent casing, it could be a problematic. And I think it'll be a lot less of a magic bullet than the state's hoping.
And the cell phone evidence could be very interesting too. The defense has mentioned, Joe, in some of its documents that, they're looking for information about who did the geofencing stuff. That's where basically they can tell who was in an area or whose cell phone was in an area. They block it off and they do all these. It's all data driven. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, we know cell phones are a big part of every investigation, and this is going to be another one of those case for experts to battle. I don't know if Indiana is a Fry or a Daubert state or a combination of the two, but it basically, if it's a Fry state, it's going to be really difficult to get some of this evidence in, right? Because the judge makes the decision, and we know that a lot of people, are worried about this. So the issue that comes down is that in the towers is going to be very remote. There's not a lot of cell towers, so that they can probably zone in and say there's no other way that this person could be there because this is the only tower that pinged him or what have you. So it's going to be quite interesting. I mean, we're all going to be watching this because there's a lot of this new technology, including this geofencing stuff that's going to come into play, because we're seeing it in other cases too, like Idaho and some other places. So this will be the first crack at it and see how it goes down.
We are all going to be watching. Joe Giacalone and Bob Motta, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Now, I've heard there's geofencing going on in the Delphi case, in the Idaho case. Here's what I want to say. Moving forward on this channel, I will be discussing a lot of different cases. The Idaho case, the Delphi case, the Chad Daybell case, and the Karen Reed case. This is the True Crime Cult channel and the True Crime Cult community. This is not the Idaho 4 channel or the Idaho 4 cult community. I'm happy that everyone who has subscribed to me is going to be going on this wild ride through true crime. This is a new beginning. I'm laser focused and I'm not going anywhere. I'll be doing lives once a week. But the rest of the time, I'll be pumping out original content for Delphi, for the Karen Reed case, for the Chad Daybell case, and for the Idaho 4 case. Welcome to the true crime cult community. That's what this channel is all about, is true crime. Not just one case, not just two cases, but a plethora of cases. And I'm honored that you guys are taking this journey with me. Like always, like, subscribe, and comment. And please keep the comments respectful. And hit that bell notification for any new uploads. I'll be dropping some more content tomorrow. Everyone in the true crime cult community, I love you. And I'm happy you're supporting me. And I'm out.